Our speaker today is our own Emily, and I'm delighted to introduce her on Earth Day, or Earth Day weekend, because it's so appropriate for her to be our speaker today, because she works for Appalachian Sustainable Development. And as younger folks would say, she walks the talk. So, welcome, Emily.
Well, thank you, Linda. I don't know how I feel about that introduction because our congregation is full of people who I believe take seriously the fact that all of life is interconnected. Jason and I often appreciate the high Prius to non-Prius ratio in the parking lot of this church. So there's a lot of you here that are doing that, and I appreciate being a part of this group. But the environmental movement has always been important to me because the natural world has always been such a big part of my life. And so to be able to talk on this day, set aside to honor and celebrate the fight to protect our mother, our home, is very dear to me. But when WAVA requested that I lead a celebration of Earth Day, it honestly took my breath away a little bit. Celebrate Earth Day this year in 2018? How would one go about celebrating Earth Day at a time when there seems to be so much bad news about the current state and future of the natural world? I honestly didn't know how I'd be able to put a positive spin on the subject when often I only feel despair for the planet where change is coming so quickly, where things we used to be able to count on, regular seasons, snow in the wintertime, the jet stream, suddenly are not such a sure bet. And it's one thing after another. As a result of our insatiable thirst for the power brought about by burning fossil fuels and subsequent climate change, humans have managed to unleash from within the world itself, I fear, forces beyond our control. In warming temperatures, melting polar ice, and thawing permafrost, feedback loops have begun, which will further man-made warming, causing shifts in weather patterns, rising sea levels, mass extinctions, and great suffering. E.O. Wilson, the famous biologist, predicts that at the current rate of species extinction by the end of this century, when my children very likely will still be alive, over half of the world's estimated 8.7 million species will become extinct. We currently have knowledge of around 2 million of those species. So most of the species on Earth will become extinct before we even record their existence. So began an inner dialogue between my brain and my heart about how to live in this world right now. And the ever-present question about all life slings my way these days: how do I explain this to my girls in a way that does not seem hopeless? What about the fact that I'm complicit in all of this? This conversation in my head started out being pretty dark. So I get this same sensation like the wind is being knocked out of me on a regular basis. Sometimes driving to work in my minivan, burning gasoline as I hurtle down I-81 at 70 miles an hour and listening to the news, relaying the latest story about the bleaching of the Great Barrier Reef, polar bears dying, wildfires and storms that are larger and coming with more frequency, fresh water disappearing for many, the last white rhino. I don't want to spend too long on this part, the despair I feel deep in me for ecosystems in flux, for my kids, for all the kids born into these times we find ourselves in. The ash trees that are disappearing, the way of the hemlock, the chestnut. I won't spend my whole talk here, but I want to be honest about where I'm coming from, because to not go there would be to lie about the state of things. Let me apologize for getting a little political, but when Donald Trump was elected president and I found myself crying on and off for a few days, there were a few reasons. But one of the big ones for me was the sense that now, along with all our non-human planet mates, were doomed. That this was the final nail in the casket. The Paris Climate Accord, signed in 2016 by 96 by 196 countries set modest goals to reduce carbon emissions starting in 2020. While the intent of this agreement was for each country to develop their own ambitious plans to reduce CO2 emissions to keep the temperature rise to less than 2 degrees Celsius, scientists have said that these levels would still be catastrophic for life on Earth, and that the goal should be to keep the temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Well, in 2016, the average temperature was 1.3 degrees above pre-industrial levels. Now, true, this was just average for 1 year. But who's seen the famous line graphs in Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth? According to 350.org, the increase in temperature by 1 degree Celsius has had major impacts already. Global grain yields have declined by 10% from heat waves and floods connected to climate change, unleashing hunger and displacement. Over 1 million people living near coasts have been forced from their homes due to rising seas and stronger storms, and millions more are expected to flee in the coming years. Climate change science has evolved rapidly in recent years, where before we weren't sure which of these events were caused by climate change, but now scientists are able to pinpoint the contribution that climate change is making. Too little, too late, the voice in my head repeats over and over. We humans have this funny notion, now that we're wearing clothes and carrying computers in our pockets, living in our climate-controlled homes, that we're separate from the rest of the living world, that we're a special case. And we are, of course, in some incredible and horrifying ways. We're capable of creating art and music and carrying out incredible acts of love. And at the same time, it seems we're not quite smart enough, or maybe not brave enough, to rein in our incredible appetite for fossil fuels. Would it change how you feel if I reminded you that yes, while we are capable of such great and awful things, and in some ways we are really smart, maybe more than all the other creatures in some ways, we also belong to this earth. In the same way that deer belong on mountain clearings, or that the hellbender belongs in streams, or that geese belong to the sky. We're as much a part of this web of life as any of these other beings. Those trees, that mountain, the soil alive under our feet. This current path we're on is so new in the relative scale of things, a blip in our long history here. In an incredibly short amount of time, we've developed technologies that have allowed us to seemingly sever ourselves from our direct dependence on the land around us. We've forgotten our old ways, which are not really old at all in the grand scheme of things, that have allowed us to live in some kind of balance with the other beings that make up this earth. Because the earth is more than the rock under the surface, it's a living system. We're a part of it. We've co-evolved with all the other estimated 8.7 million species on this earth. And when we act in ways that are harmful to this living system, we hurt ourselves, along with many other beings. But here's the flip side. When we act in ways that support and heal this amazing planet, this land around us, we are the very earth itself, bringing back balance to itself, healing itself. Looking at the major issue of climate change, it's hard to not get overwhelmed with the immensity of the situation and what feels like our inability to effect change in the magnitude necessary to change our current course. It's easy to get discouraged and to fall into despair for the uncertainty of these times. So I challenge you, as I challenge myself, not to give in to despair. I want to share a few things that I found to be helpful in creating the mental space to act in love instead of fear for the earth and its inhabitants. So the first one is to recognize the many ways we're already in relationship with the natural world around us. This is personal and can include a great diversity of things. Many people garden, which is such a satisfying way to connect with the earth's rhythms. The best gardeners I know nurture relationships with the living soul and with plants. It is real work, but the work goes both ways. The gardener tends the soil, creating the conditions necessary for the earth to do its work through the living soil, sun, and rain, and the earth gives back in abundance. Other people hunt and fish, another beautiful way to cultivate gratitude and connection. I'm so fortunate to be the beneficiary of those who hunt. But there are many ways: bird watching, dog walking, cloud gazing, swimming, or creek wading, berry picking. If we can bring some of these activities into the tent that encompasses our spiritual practice, whatever that may be, we'll be richer for it. And that means being intentional about spending time there regularly. 2, it's okay and important to grieve the changes that are coming and have already come as a result of human activities. Feelings of sadness and despair about the state of the world's rapidly changing ecosystems are normal. But I was a little stuck in that place when Weva first asked me about giving this talk, because I hadn't given those feelings attention. The feelings of grief were all mixed up with feelings of guilt about not doing more and about my personal choices. But coming to an understanding that how I was feeling was more than guilt, but was actually grief, was freeing to me, because the flip side of grief is love. And when we take off our problem-solving hat and instead allow ourselves to be pulled to action by a great love, the way forward becomes much clearer. Third one, do what you can where you are and support those around that are trying to do the same. Watch for those fighting and join them, support them, lift them up, amplify their voices. There are some amazing people out there working in concert with the earth and standing up to protect their homes, their water, and their children's future. And we've got a good number of them right here in our community. Tom McMullen, he's one of them. He and Amanda grow much of their food in their own backyard, and you should see it if you haven't. It's a thing of beauty. Yesterday, the girls and I visited the Abingdon Earth Day celebration, and if that's not a labor of love, I don't know what is. And I know it is a labor. This year the theme was biodiversity, and walking around to the many booths put up by organizations from the surrounding area, I was struck by how much good work is going on to protect the biodiversity here and to teach our children about it. Wolf Hills Community School, another labor of love and a group that inspires me. While my girls don't go there, I'm glad they're in this community and that the children that attend get to spend large portions of the day outside, playing and exploring and developing that relationship with the natural world. And this connection is integrated into their learning. May they be an example for all schools. And I have to mention Jason here, along with all the other volunteer cave surveyors throughout the karst areas in this country. He's the Washington County Director for the Virginia Speleological Society, which means he keeps a catalog of all the caves in the county, recording and mapping the new ones as needed. Not everyone would find cave mapping enjoyable. It often involves contorting your body through nearly impossibly small passages while trying to see through the mud on your surveying equipment and write with numbed fingers. But also involves seeing places that no one has ever seen before, ever. I don't think he would say he does this in service to the earth. I'm not sure, actually. But this definitely falls under the category of acts of love. And when there are questions about how land use will affect our sensitive cave ecosystems, information cataloging where these caves are and how water flows through these underground systems, that information is there. A few more people I've been inspired by recently. Neil and Beth LaFerriere with Blackberry Botanicals. I met Neil and Beth at a farm up near Beckley, West Virginia. They're down-to-earth folks that homeschool their 4 kids on their farm. Their farm includes over 100 acres of woods, where they tend the native herbs growing there like ginseng, black cohosh, and elderberry. The proposed Mountain Valley Pipeline, which has been in the news a lot, is slated to go through their property. Distraught over the swath of forest that will be permanently destroyed, they have taken it upon themselves to rescue the wildflowers and medicinal plants that are growing in the path of this pipeline, and not just on their own property. Starting with just their family, they've now been joined by many others in the herbalist community that have they've been held up by terrible weather, if you think about the weather we've had in the last month, and permitting woes, but have managed to move hundreds of plants. I've been so moved by their efforts and their love and respect for the healing plants. As one of the herbalists noted after a day spent working on a plant rescue, we were there to rescue plants, but I think it was the plants who were rescuing us. Another resident turned activist goes by the name of Red. Have you all heard about Red in the news recently? Red Terry. She's a 61-year-old woman near Floyd, Virginia, and lives on Bent Mountain. The mountain land they live on has been in her husband's family for generations. The land that the path of the pipeline crosses has been taken by eminent domain, and without the final permits in place for the actual construction of the pipeline, the logging crew is coming through. Red has been sitting in a tree stand along with her 31-year-old daughter in another tree stand close by since April 2nd. So think about the weather that we've had since then. Warrants have been issued for her arrest for trespassing on her own land. The Roanoke County sheriffs are keeping any supplies from supporters for reaching either of these women, and they claim that they will provide the supplies, but only if the women come down. And if they come down, they'll be arrested. This story made the Washington Post yesterday, and there's some interviews online if you're interested in learning more about these courageous women. It might seem that these acts of resistance couldn't possibly stop something like a pipeline construction. Individually, maybe not, but collectively, these people and all the others that have stood up and continue to, including the incredibly brave and strong members of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe and others that have protested the Dakota Access Pipeline that was to run through their reservation and under the Missouri and Mississippi rivers, they were unable to stop this. But there's an energy building, and it's not the fossil fuel type. This is actually, stopping pipelines is actually one of 3 strategies recommended by Bill McKibben, who's an environmentalist and journalist with the organization 350.org. And I'm not going to go into all the detail here because I've been talking a long time, but the first is joining in work pioneered by groups like the Sierra Club. Work should be done to persuade towns, cities, counties, and states to pledge to make the transition to 100% renewable energy. And this has been done after the U.S. is backing out of the climate accord, the Paris Climate Accord. Many states and cities responded by saying they're still going to commit themselves. Job 2, according to McKibben, is to block new fossil fuel infrastructure. And in some places, this will be law. Portland, Oregon recently passed a bill banning new pipes and such over the strenuous objections to the industry. And the third is to cut off the money that fuels this industry by divestment, which has now begun to take a real and telling toll, and by the kind of lawsuits that New York, San Francisco, and a host of other cities have filed. So I appreciate the work of Bill McKibben, and if you want to learn more about practical solutions and about the situation, I'd suggest you go to 350.org. So this brings me back to my question of how do we live in this world? How do we hold both the knowledge of all the challenges we face as a planet with the joy of being here, of being alive in us? And I would suggest by being present, by feeling the feelings, and by getting our hands dirty along with all the others on this path that we're on. So I wanted to share a little bit. I've been reading this book, Braiding Sweetgrass. Has anyone read this one? It's incredible. It's just a really beautiful book, a collection of essays. Robin Wall Kimmerer is a botanist and a member of the Citizen Potawatomi Nation. And so this is what she has to say. And she just has a beautiful view of how we can potentially, how her tribe in the past and how all of us can connect with the natural world that would change how things are now. And this is from an essay called The Sacred and the Superfund. And so she's talking about a Superfund site she had come upon. The waste beds are not unique. The cause and the chemistry vary from my homeland to yours, but each of us can name these wounded places. We hold them in our mind and our hearts. The question is, what do we do in response? We could take the path of fear and despair. We could document every scary scene of ecological destruction and never run out of material for a haunted hayride of environmental disasters, constructing a shocking nightmare of environmental tragedies in rooms carved from a monoculture of invasive plants on the shore of the most chemically contaminated lake in the United States. There could be scenes of oiled pelicans. How about chainsaw murders on clear-cut slopes washing into rivers? Corpses of extinct Amazon primates, prairies paved over for parking lots, polar bears stranded on melting ice floes. What could such a vision create other than woe and tears? Joanna Macy writes that until we grieve for our planet, we cannot love it. Grieving is a sign of spiritual health. But it is not enough to weep for our lost landscape. We have to put our hands in the earth and make ourselves whole again. Even a wounded world is feeding us. Even a wounded world holds us, giving us moments of joy and wonder. I choose joy over despair, not because I have my head in the sand, but because joy is what the earth gives me daily, and I must return the gift. So I'll also choose joy and keep choosing joy over despair whenever I can, and acknowledge with gratitude and amazement the miracle of our being here at all. Thanks to Harry. And I'm going to close with one story just about a night back in February. It was the evening of February 7th, and it was cold. As many of you know, we have a small farm, and on this farm, we've got goats. Last fall, we brought in a billy goat to breed our does. I apologize in advance if this is more information you wanted to know about goat biology. But typically, goats go into heat every 21 days, and for most dairy breeds, only in the fall and winter. So when I brought this billy in, I expected a staggered breeding of the 4 does that I had. Some people say, though, that bringing in a billy goat can bring all the goats into heat at the same time. Well, I'd never seen that happen. As we'd reached goat capacity, or maybe you'd call it goat saturation for our small farm, 2 of the 4 goats that had been bred found a home with my coworker, Michelle Morgan. She was a first-time goat owner, and I'm sure our office mates lament our open office floor plan as we trade goat antics almost daily. At the same time, I wasn't sure if her 2 does had been bred, but over the winter they were looking larger and larger. I did the math about the earliest possible impregnation, and it was early February. Too cold for babies to be coming into the world all wet, but they were coming. On February 7th, I was at the church for women's group and got home after dark. Jason had put all the animals up for the night, and no babies. Around 10 o'clock that evening, I got a text from Michelle. She had a baby. So exciting. I got the feeling I should also check my goats, even though Jason had reported no goats earlier. So I strapped on a headlamp, pulled on my boots, and walked up the chicken hill, where our chicken coop was housed with an add-on goat shelter. And there, in the light of my headlamp, along with the white shape of Iris, were 2 more obscure flashes of white. I hollered down the hill for Jason to get towels. What are the chances that goats, obviously bred on the same day, would give birth within hours of each other? When I got there, 2 beautiful elf-eared babies were standing next to Iris, their coats still damp. We rubbed them down and bundled them into our coats, brought them down to the lower barn along with Iris. Claire and May took turns holding the newborns as we gave Iris hot water and grain. It was such a beautiful thing to get to experience, this new life in the middle of winter. The girls debated about who got to name which kid, one a buckling and one a doeling. We were fortunate that Rosalie was asleep. Somehow it was decided that Claire would get to name the girl and May the boy. May named her buckling Buddy, and Claire, who was a very decisive namer of animals, named the doeling Miracle. I could feel my mathematician husband squirming a little bit beside me, but the name stood, and Miracle she was. Not in any kind of supernatural sense, but one of the everyday miracles that come to us, unasked for, but that change us. Claire did come to regret her choice a little when an hour later we heard the loud cry of yet another goat from up on the chicken hill. So back up the hill I went as fast as I could, trying to find the source of the crying. I'd already been up there once to look around for any babies we might have missed, but this time I found a little wet doeling all the way around the other side of the chicken house, lying in the cold grass. She was white with big cream polka dots. So beautiful. I gave her a quick rub and apologized profusely for leaving her all by herself up in the dark and hustled her back down to her mom. Amazingly, she was just fine and needed just a little warming. Since Miracle was already taken, she was named Dora after the intrepid Dora the Explorer. What a night. I remember the feeling of gratitude that night for having been there, for having everything turned out okay, for goats' innate knowledge about how to give birth and take care of their young, for everyday miracles and the good gifts of the earth. Will we succeed in saving the earth or participate in the earth healing itself? If we do, it will be by working together on the big solutions, and also through a million individual acts of love, forces of nature, every one.